Hello and welcome to GameSack. I figured I'd make an episode showcasing the work of M2. M2 is a Japanese game developer well known mainly for handling ports and emulations of various game collections. Sorry, I'm not talking about the canceled 3DO-related device called the Panasonic M2. But here's a tiny bit about M2, the game developer. Founded in 1993 and headquartered in Abiko, Japan, M2 is a video game developer that most people only started to recognize and appreciate in the last 20 years. They started on Sega consoles, porting games from one platform to another. In fact, their first release ever was a passion project of theirs. They eventually moved into emulation on the PlayStation 2, and even designed the emulators used in Sega's Virtual Console releases on the Wii. They also did some Virtual Console emulation work for other companies. Occasionally, they designed brand new and reimagined games from the ground up, showing how versatile their talents are. With over 160 titles under their belt so far, M2 continues to be a sought-after developer to this day. Now, M2 has done a ton of games, so naturally that means there's going to be some that don't make it into this episode, but on the other hand, there are tons of games that did make it in. And if you want to know more about M2 themselves, I encourage you to watch My Life in Gaming's documentary about them called M2 Complete Works. It's 6 years old, but it's still fantastic.
This footage looks really familiar. It's almost like you stole all of our footage from when we went to interview M2 in Japan. What are you doing?
I'm keeping that footage, that's what I'm doing. First up, I'd like to show you some ports that M2 has worked on, which means they reprogrammed these games from the ground up for the console. M2's first official game was Gauntlet 4 on the Genesis, which was released in 1993. This was originally being made as a homebrew port of the Atari Gauntlet arcade game for the Sharp X68000 computer system. But soon, a decision was made to instead move the code to the Mega Drive so they could get it officially published worldwide through Tengen, who owned the rights to the game at the time since Tengen was actually Atari. The first build was quite faithful, but it was bare bones and it had no audio. As I mentioned before, Chris Tang, who worked at Tengen at the time, suggested an adventure mode of some kind be added. He was quite surprised when he got a build that had it a few months later. They also got Hitoshi Sakimoto and Masaharu Iwata to do the audio thanks to Tengen's new funding, and it came out incredible. Much better than M2 had hoped for. The game supports 4 players simultaneously, just like the arcade, and you can use either Sega's tap or EA's tap. The resulting product is an excellent port of the Gauntlet arcade game, and they did a lot of this just by eyeballing the game at a local arcade. The quest mode adds some meat to this one. You start off with some text to set you up for your adventure. In this mode, you'll need to explore towers and get crystals and what have you. Now the treasure chests that you grab count as actual money. You'll find yourself going out of the way for them just to be able to afford better weapons and the like. Each tower has many floors that need to be conquered. There's a password here that's a bit cumbersome. The game's only flaw is that it doesn't use a battery backup. The game ended up being a hit and became a favorite of Mega Drive owners in Japan. It wasn't quite as popular internationally, but it was well regarded. I think that adding the quest mode here is what gave M2 the mindset to make their releases a little better than they needed to be by adding something here or there, something they would often do in the future that really sets them apart. M2's next project was porting Treasure's Genesis game Gunstar Heroes to the Game Gear in 1995. This would only be released in Japan. The Genesis game was a showpiece for the console, so trying to cram it all onto the Game Gear would be a tough endeavor. I'm here to say that they did quite a remarkable job, at least when it comes to replicating the visuals and action of the 16-bit game. M2 did their best to have as many things on screen as possible. In fact, there can be so much on screen that it can get confusing simply because everything is lost in the extreme amounts of flicker. The game also moves slightly slower, runs at a lower frame rate, and there's less screen area to work with. They did change or omit parts of some levels though. Like the second level here has been changed. It's a chore because you need to hold the jump button to float. Overall, it's quite technically impressive how faithful it is if there's anything to take away from this port. Odomedius Gorgeous on the Japanese Xbox 360 is a port from the original Konami game simply called Odomedius. This is a horizontal shooter that's based on Gradius and has a lot of very young anime girls. If that kind of stuff is your thing, well, you'll love this. In fact, your ship is basically a flotation device for the questionably young anime girl riding it. Obviously, the game is a cute 'em up, and there's nothing wrong with that. Gameplay-wise, it's pretty much Gradius. The graphics are very bright and of course polygonal, but not something that pushes the Xbox 360 in any way. The music fits, but it doesn't stand out too much beyond that. The game feels kind of like a discount Parodius in every way, but hey, maybe you'll dig it. Just make sure that you can play region-locked games on your console. VR Virtua Racing was ported to the Nintendo Switch as part of the Sega Ages line. This definitely isn't emulation. It mimics the arcade quite well, of course, but now we have super sharp 1080p graphics that run at 60 frames per second where the arcade only ran at 30. They changed the colors around some, making the game overall much brighter. They also added an insane 8-player mode, if you even know that many people. And because they're M2, they took the excellent music from the 32X version's replay mode and used it for the replay here instead of the arcade music. But of course they made it sound like the arcade board. This is the port of Virtua Racing that I've always wanted. Well, except that they left out the extra tracks and cars from the 32X game. Would have been nice to have the PlayStation 2 tracks too. Supposedly they wanted to include them, but instead of doing that, they didn't.
Time bonus!
On the TurboGrafx 16 Mini, they ported some arcade games as a secret. For example, Fantasy Zone on the TurboGrafx is fine. But M2 went ahead and reported the game to the console, making sure the graphics and audio were much better and more faithful to the arcade. They did an excellent job, but for some reason it always starts me in 2-player mode, so maybe it was a bit of a rush job, I don't know. They also ported Gradius. Gradius on the PC Engine is good, but they wanted a more arcade-accurate representation, I guess. I'm not sure why, as I feel the PC Engine version is a bit better than the arcade, especially when it comes to the music. The new port sounds worse and is also now in mono. Salamander was another one. Pretty good on the PC Engine as is. But reported by M2, it's even better. You now get those cheesy voices that were in the arcade, and I love these. Definitely the best one of these 3 ports for sure. And yes, these will play on real hardware if you're enterprising enough to extract the ROMs. M2 also became well known for the quality of their emulation for modern consoles. Well, modern for their time anyway. It's something that they still continue to do to this day, so let's take a look at a bunch of these projects. A lot of the later Sega Ages titles on the PlayStation 2 received the M2 treatment, all of which stayed in Japan. The first was Space Harrier 2, Space Harrier Collection. This includes the arcade Space Harrier, Space Harrier 2 on the Genesis, and Space Harrier 3D for the Master System. Here we see what would become common options offered from M2, like being able to choose your display resolution. It defaults to 480i of course, but you can play in 240p like the original games or even in 480p. Unfortunately, the emulation in this set isn't perfect, especially regarding the audio.
Get ready? Get ready?
But hey, this was their first time emulating, so let's cut them a little slack here. They did a bunch of different titles on the console for Sega, like Last Bronx here. I can't tell you how accurate the emulation is since I've never played the real arcade, but it seems pretty good to me. You can even choose from 57 or 60 frames per second for extreme arcade accuracy. Virtual On is another good one. You get the same frame rate options as Last Bronx, but you can also turn the alpha channel on, so now you have true transparencies instead of a dithered mesh. You can choose to listen to the arcade music or the arranged Saturn music, which I've chosen here because it's awesome. An interesting collection is Gunstar Heroes Treasure Box, which has Gunstar Heroes, Dynamite Headdy, and Alien Soldier. You can choose the English regions from the games that had that available. M2's Genesis emulation has improved here with better audio. But if you go into the region selection of Gunstar Heroes and hold right for a bit, you get a prototype version. Hold right for a little bit longer, and you get the Game Gear version. That's right, here's M2 emulating a game that they made themselves. You can increase the sprite limit and overclock the CPU. Both of these things help immensely, but there is still some sprite flicker. Sometimes the game can run a bit too fast. Still, I find it more enjoyable than playing it on a real Game Gear. Then there's Phantasy Star Collection, which contains the 4 RPGs and even the text adventure. All of them except for the text adventure can be played in English. And all of these have some quality of life options. You can choose between 2 boost speeds. I've chosen the max here, which is probably too fast. You can also choose a difficulty select, which will help you level up much faster. Very nice. One of my favorite M2 emulations on the PS2 is Galaxy Force 2 Special Extended Edition. You get great emulations of the arcade, Genesis, and Master System games, but you also get Galaxy Force Neo Classic. This is basically the arcade game, but you get some extra resolution and even a true 16:9 widescreen option. This almost counts as a new game, but since it's otherwise super close to the arcade, I just consider it a really nice extra. This is my favorite way, by far, to play Galaxy Force. M2 moved on to the mighty Nintendo DS with Konami Classic Series arcade hits. This collection has a ton of titles on it. Most of them are very primitive, but there's still some good stuff. I find it amusing that Twinbee is called Rainbow Bell instead. Since the DS doesn't have much in the way of screen resolution, M2 was forced to use interlacing to get all of the detail on there. It kind of works, but you can see it shimmering. However, it is much less noticeable on the DS's LCD screen. You can adjust which screen you'd like to play it on and even play it in tape mode, but you'll still have the shimmering. You can even adjust the dip switch settings using the touchscreen. They also handled Namco Museum DS just a few months later. This one has fewer games on it than the Konami Classics title did, but that was Namco's choice, not M2's. The games here are presented in pretty much the same way they were on the Konami release, with the interlacing and different aspect ratios that you can display the screen in. The shimmering is quite noticeable on Xevious, even on the LCD screen. But hey, if you need some Namco Museum on the go, this will do. I just wish that the game selection were a bit better. During the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 era, they were also busy bringing games to modern audiences via emulation, like with the Sega Vintage Collection on the two aforementioned consoles. You download each title you want individually. These naturally featured a bunch of options to breathe a little bit of new life into the games. And we got Monster World 4 officially in English for the first time. Well, technically the Wii Virtual Console version, also by M2, beat this one to market by about 13 days. This is such a great title, and someone somewhere, perhaps several people, deserve jail for not localizing this in its own time. Okay, maybe not jail, but perhaps a sternly worded tweet or something. A similar thing was the Neo Geo Station, where you could grab up to 16 individual games. The Neo Geo Station was available for the PlayStation 3, PSP, and the Vita. Once again, they come with some good options, but they're a bit light on those compared to some of the other releases that they've done. But hey, if you like any of these particular Neo Geo games, then it wasn't a bad deal at the time. M2 also did a series for Sega on the 3DS known as 3D Ages. This was mostly digital, but they did offer it physically as well, though we only got one of the 3 volumes here in North America because we suck. One of the first games I downloaded was Super Hang-On. I believe this was the first time we ever officially got an arcade-perfect version of this at home. As always, M2 added many options from how to control the game, different degrees of difficulty, and different screen modes. The different screen modes are cool, but I prefer this one, which is wider than the original, but tapers off on the sides for some reason. They fixed this on the physical release, which sadly only came out in Japan. Many of the billboards on the side of the road have been changed to advertise other Sega games instead of Bridgestone tires or Marlboros. The 3D effect is quite good, and it's fun to see it added to such a game. I definitely don't regret purchasing this one. Space Harrier was also another early one that they did for the 3DS. The wider view and the 3D are both nice, but I wish I could completely get rid of the screen artwork around everything. They also fixed this on the Japanese physical release. But what makes this one special is the end of the game. Usually after you finish the boss rush on the final stage, it just ends unceremoniously. The Master System port added a new final boss called Haya-O. M2 saw that and saw that it was good, so they added it to the end of this game. I wasn't expecting it when I got to the end, so it was a big surprise for me, a very pleasant one. Things like this are what make M2 the best. Another interesting one is Outrun. This time they give us a full widescreen view that's selectable. I love it. Of course, the car is no longer a Ferrari since Sega didn't want to pay the license just for this release. The car still looks good though, and is close enough. The game runs at 30 frames per second just like the arcade, but M2 also added a special mode. This has the game running entirely at 60 frames per second now instead of just the scrolling backgrounds. You can also select from a 4th musical track called Camino a Mi Amor. It wasn't composed by Hiro, who did the original music, but it's not bad. Thunderblade also marks the first time we officially got a perfect version of this game at home. This one makes use of the circle pad nub on the new 3DS, which is what I'm using to play these games here. You use it to control your throttle, but fortunately you don't have to hold it. This game is criminally short, so I don't recommend it to most people, but hey, I'm glad I have it. I love that funky slap bass. course, they did plenty of Genesis games in this manner, giving them new 3D visuals. It was nice seeing these in 3D. They also give some decent options like how you want the PSG to be emulated, a normal or extremely curved screen, or if you'd like the 3D to pop out or fall in. I have to go with the fall in mode. I've always wondered why they ported the Genesis version of Altered Beast instead of the arcade game. Apparently it's because the Genesis version has parallax layers already and the arcade didn't, which I always thought was kind of odd for an arcade game. Surprisingly, the depth effect in this title is pretty shallow. We even got some Master System 3D games as extras. Unfortunately with these, there isn't a dot-by-dot perfect pixel mode where everything is sharp on the horizontal aspect. These games use the same left and right views as they did on the Master System, which means the 3D slider on the 3DS can't adjust depth. You can only turn the 3D on or off. It's still cool that these are here though. And why did they change Maze Hunter 3D to the Japanese Maze Walker name despite having an international option available? Maze Walker sounds way more boring. That title also happens to be way more accurate. They even took the boxing game from the SG-1000 and made a 3D version. Emulation is a huge chunk of M2's bread and butter, so that means there's more interesting stuff that I want to cover, so let's continue. This is Collection of Mana, which is currently only available on the Nintendo Switch. It includes Final Fantasy Adventure, The Secret of Mana, and its prequel called Trials of Mana, in English for the first time. There was also a remake of this game which M2 had nothing to do with. These action RPGs are well loved by pretty much everybody. Not everyone, but like I said, pretty much everyone. It's good to have Final Fantasy Adventure and Secret of Mana on here, but the reason most people will probably want this one is to play through the official English release of Trials of Mana. They've had to do with fan translations up to this point, so even people who have played through those will likely want to go through this one again just to see the similarities and the differences. Too bad that the Game Boy Advance remake of the original isn't on here. M2 also launched their Shot Triggers line, which consists mostly of shooters, like Battle Garega on the PlayStation 4. And what can I say? It's Battle Garega, just like I remember it from over 25 years ago when I bought it for the Saturn. Except that this one has a lot of the usual M2 flourishes here, with tons of options to make the game as difficult or as easy as you'd like. As you can see, the screen borders are absolutely cluttered with information. Stuff that's cool and useful, but you might rarely ever look at it. It's pretty nuts. You can turn off the screen borders entirely to focus solely on the game itself, which I prefer. You can also resize and rotate the screen. You can rotate your 16:9 monitor and play it like this for the ultimate takeover! They even included a bunch of different music styles from the Saturn arrangement to newly arranged stuff. The 2016 Perfect Mix is probably my favorite. Or how about Dodonpachi Blissful Death Reincarnation? That title alone makes it sound like a fun time already. But Dodonpachi is always good, and this one has only been released in Japan. Again, you've got the crazy border. I actually really do like the map on the right side, which shows you where you're at in the stage. This is a bullet hell, or at least I think that it is. I'm not exactly sure what makes a game qualify or not. I like how you can fire a more concentrated beam and it slows your movement down, which can be quite helpful. And of course, the music is really nice in this one as well. A subset of the Shot Triggers is the Toaplan Arcade Garage, which contains various Toaplan shooters. Like Zero Fire here, which has Hellfire and Zero Wing. You can play the arcade, Genesis, or even PC Engine CD versions of these games, which is pretty awesome. Yes, you can even play the legendary European Mega Drive version of Zero Wing. Naturally, each of them has tons of information on the sides of the screen, if you want it there. I like having access to all versions of each game, and in the case here, you'll find that the arcade versions all have the worst audio of the bunch. Also included in this one is a game called Demon's World from Toaplan. Those of you who are at the top of your class and have really good brains will realize that this isn't a shooter. Oh well, still cool to have it here. I should also quickly mention the Yakuza games. All of the modern titles have arcades that you can wander around and play games. M2 was responsible for handling the emulations of these games in most titles, but of course they don't feature the same kind of options as the standalone releases have. M2 also did Darius Cosmic Collection for Taito on the PlayStation 4 and Switch here. Or you can always pronounce it as Darius if you want to sound pretentious. Darius. Sadly, this one is kind of a letdown. First and foremost, they split it up over 2 releases, arcade and console, just so they could charge you twice. Obviously, this was Taito's choice and not M2's. Next, there's no way to have a fully black screen. Maybe that's because I'm playing the Switch version and this is some kind of preventative thing for its crappy handheld screen, I'm not entirely sure. But in docked mode, it should go all the way black, come on. But there's still plenty to like here. You can play the original game in 3-screen mode, which is super wide. I like how the center screen looks a little darker to differentiate it slightly. They'd never stay perfectly calibrated for long in a real arcade. Of course, you can turn this effect off if you want a nice uniform screen. I liked as how the games kept releasing the fewer and fewer screens they used. Darius Gaiden, which is by far the best game in the entire series, only used a single screen and it's here in all its glory. The console collection is okay. I like how on the 2 PC Engine games you can enable Super Graphics compatibility for slightly less flicker. You can even play the Master System game. Sadly, G-Spot Darius isn't anywhere on either package. I wonder if they just forgot about it. M2 also did the Sega Ages line for the Nintendo Switch. There were lots of games here that we've seen a million times before, like Space Harrier, but they did keep Haya-O as the final boss, so that's cool. They also added some stuff that we hadn't seen at home in arcade perfect form, like G-Lock. Afterburner it isn't, but it was cool to have a perfect version at home, I guess. Or Herzog Zwei for the Genesis. They added a really cool tutorial so you could learn how to play this real-time strategy game. It's very rare that I enjoy tutorials, but they made learning fun. And that's good because this is already a fun game. On many of their Sega Ages games on the Switch, they added some super easy modes, like in Shinobi. You can play as a white ninja who can take multiple hits instead of dying upon contact like in the arcade original. It makes the games more accessible, and you don't have to use these features. Some of these releases are a bit lackluster though, for example Wonder Boy Monsterland. There's no option to play, in my opinion, the superior Master System version. Why not? I imagine this was Sega's decision and not M2's. One complaint that I do have is that there's no perfect black border on many of these. Instead, you get a gray gradient. Again, maybe it's because it's on the Switch and the Switch can't handle perfectly black screens. I don't know. But whatever the reason, I don't like it. One game where the border can be helpful though is in Phantasy Star on the Switch. Unfortunately, this is only the first game, but it's a hell of a game. The screen borders help you keep tab of your HP, even when it's not displayed on the game screen. But more importantly, it auto-draws dungeon maps for you, which is extremely helpful. They also added some options to help make your game easier if you'd like, similar to the Phantasy Star collection on the PS2. But at least this game was released everywhere. It usually goes for cheap, so I recommend that you check it out if you want to see how good 8-bit RPGs can actually be. Have you heard of the Game Gear Micro? Well, its games were also handled by M2. These things were only ever released in Japan and have a few different games each. As the name implies, they're quite tiny, and you can only play the games on the built-in screen, no kind of video out for these guys. I mean, the word play is doing a lot of heavy lifting here since it's not really that playable, but still kinda cool that these exist. Lastly, as far as emulation goes, M2 was responsible for the software scene in the Genesis Mini, the Genesis 2 Mini, and the TurboGrafx and PC Engine Minis. I've done full episodes about each one of these devices if you want to see and hear more about them in greater detail. Long story short is that the emulation in these is mostly pretty good, except for the audio, which can be delayed by about 8 frames or so. From what I understand, this is a fault of the system on a chip that they use and it can't really be fixed. Also, the audio emulation on the Sega CD FMV stuff is a bit lacking.
To spend the night. Your mission? Protect those girls from whatever happened to the last ones.
What's cool though is that the TurboGrafx Mini, they also added some extra modes, like a caravan stage for Soldier Blade. This is basically a score as many points as you can within the time limit style of thing. They also added a Twin B caravan. Cool that this is here, but it's pretty primitive looking. And lastly, they added a forced gear caravan thingy. I like this one because it's horizontal. The graphics and sound are pretty good, and they're neat bonuses. One thing that really makes M2 stand out is that they often create brand new or reimagined versions of games running on different hardware. It's like they use the compilations that they're involved with as an excuse to give us something new. You gotta love them. On the final Sega Ages 2500 release for the PlayStation 2, the Fantasy Zone Collection, M2 did something special. The collection has most versions of Fantasy Zone except for the NES, Famicom, and TurboGrafx 16 ports, sadly. But what M2 did is go above and beyond and port Fantasy Zone 2 to the System 16 arcade board for no reason whatsoever except for just to do it. This is pretty awesome as it's a huge video and audible upgrade over the Master System original, as you can see. However, the gameplay is quite different compared to the original game. You still have warps and you can go from the light side to the dark side and back. In the original game, there were bases that needed to be destroyed on 3 different screens before you fight the boss. In the new System 16 version, any base you kill on one side will be dead on the other. So what's the point? Well, the dark side is a hell of a lot tougher. Check out the first boss on the light side. He's a little more tricky than he was on the Master System, but still doable. But if you kill the final base on the dark side, you have to fight him there, and good luck because you gotta be on your toes to dodge all of this. So if you want an easier game, just stay on the bright side as much as you can. You might go to the dark side just to check it out and see what it looks like. You need to be careful though, as you can accidentally go to the dark side right as you kill your last base, and you can't go back before the boss appears. The fact that this game exists made everyone love M2. They even put this game on the 3DS and made a 3D version out of it. They appear to have changed the warps around a little bit in this one as they don't seem to hang around, so good luck getting back to the bright side. On the Wii, M2 was responsible for the Rebirth series of games. It started with Gradius Rebirth, which, like a lot of games in the series, is a greatest hits of the first 2, maybe 3 games. This one certainly isn't bad, and it has a few nice touches, but it'll never be a favorite of mine. There's also Contra Rebirth, which steps things up a bit. The graphical detail is a little sparse, but the action is not. There's lots of things to blow up and get blown up by. This isn't a super long game, but I think at the time digital games generally weren't meant to be full experiences, at least outside of the indie scene. Lastly, there's Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth. You can definitely tell with this one that M2 really likes Castlevania. There's a bit of the greatest hits feeling to it here and there, but mostly it feels entirely original. It was great to play a brand new 2D Castlevania game again, and the game still holds up today with great graphics and music. It's not as long as a traditional game in the series, but it feels more complete than Gradius and Contra Rebirth. But maybe that's me, since I prefer Castlevania. It's always a huge pain in the ass to set up the Wii with all of its nonsense, but playing this again always makes it worth it. I've said it before and I'll say it again now, these 3 games need to be included in a collection for modern consoles, preferably with a physical version available. On the Genesis Mini 2, M2 took Space Harrier and remade it to Genesis specs, except they imagined that the Genesis still had the scaling chip that it was originally supposed to have. That's why this wasn't featured in the ports section. I'm not sure if that chip would have had these same abilities or not, but hey, it's all imaginary anyway. Unfortunately, there's a ton of flicker. There is a hidden code that helps a little bit. This is still interesting though. They also redid Space Harrier 2 in this manner. I much prefer this remake. There's less flicker here since the game was originally designed more with the console's limitations in mind. So now compared to the original game, we get smoother everything with more colors, although the colors are still Genesis legal. The ground has also completely been redone. They even redid the music to give it that familiar Space Harrier bass line. I love it. What I don't love is that the sound effects are now worse than the original game. That's because they're all now samples instead of being done in FM. From what I understand, some of the modern Genesis development kits really encourage this practice. It's still fun to see and play these, especially Space Harrier 2, which is more in line with what I was hoping for when the Genesis was originally released. The Aleste collection is, a collection of Aleste games. At least the ones that were on the Master System and Game Gear. I really wish that all of them were on here. This has only been released in Japan and is part of the shot triggers thing that they have going. The insane amount of clutter on the sides of the screen probably give that away. But they also went out of their way and made a brand new game called GG Aleste 3. If you haven't guessed, this is for the Game Gear, brand new for the year 2020. It follows in the footsteps of the first 2 versions of the game on the handheld, but ramps things up now as it has a full megabyte of memory, which is pretty damn big for a Game Gear game, about 4 times the size of the previous 2. Like all games in the series, you can power up your pea shooter by collecting the peas. You also have 6 different weapons that you can collect which do different things, and some of them are pretty cool. These can be powered up a bit as well. The game lives up to its pedigree, and that's because some members from Compile who made the original games now work for M2. Graphically, the game is pretty good for the Game Gear with a few nice effects here and there. The music is pretty good too. I mean, as good as music on the Game Gear can be anyway. This is cool. You should definitely play this one unless you don't want to. As of this episode, the latest new thing that they've done is Haunted Castle Revisited, which is part of the Castlevania Dominus collection from Konami. This collection contains excellent emulations from the DS Castlevania titles and makes them easy to play on a modern display. As a bonus, they also included Haunted Castle, the only time Castlevania ever saw an arcade game. I don't count the Play Choice stuff. This game was cumbersome at best and not well regarded. But Haunted Castle Revisited not only makes it playable, but also fun. It basically takes the original game, tweaks it so that it's more nimble, and throws in some Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth as well for good measure. This game adds a lot of stuff that wasn't in the original. It's completely reimagined and it's all the better for it. Make no mistake though, the controls are classic Castlevania for the most part, so the jump button won't work while your whip is extended. You get the Castlevania Adventure Orb, which powers up your whip, but here it only lasts for a limited time. You encounter the orb quite often though. The graphics are gritty and digitized looking, but still good. The music is great, though not as nice as Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth on the Wii. It's still kind of odd for a Castlevania game thanks to the haunted castle-ness of it all, but to me, this made the collection here worth buying. And there you go, that's M2 for you. They are such a fun and unique company. And again, I urge you to watch My Life in Gaming's documentary about them. I'll link it below, if I remember.
For real? If you remember? Okay, well, if you think so, because I hope that people enjoy that a heck of a lot more than whatever the heck we just watched.
So, what are some of your favorite projects that M2 has worked on? Let me know. In the meantime, thank you for watching GameSack.
This is ridiculous.
You stay in that TV and you'll like it. It's time for the Game Master.
Hey guys, it's the Game Master back again here to help you with all of your video game woes here in 1992. Our first letter today comes to us from Timmy, who resides in California. And Timmy writes, "Dear Game Master, in Sonic 2, how do I get rid of that annoying item that follows me? Timmy, in the title screen, press down twice to reveal the hidden options selection. Press start to go into the options screen. Now press right at the player select to select Sonic alone. Now press start and that annoying item will no longer be following you." You're welcome, Timmy. Our next letter today comes from Keith, who lives in, I don't know, somewhere. Keith writes, "Dear Game Master, I don't mean to brag, but that is me. How do I get past that second boss in Captain Novolin for the Super Nintendo?" Well, Keith, what you need to do is inject 13 units of Novolin brand insulin in real life as you play. Other brands won't work. Good luck, Keith. I think you're gonna need it. Our next letter is from Billy. He writes, "Dear Game Master, how do I make the seemingly impossible jumps in level 4 in Valis 3 on the TurboGrafx CD?" Billy, I've mentioned this before, but the Game Master does not cover games for unpopular consoles like the TurboGrafx CD. We only cover the hot new stuff, like Captain Novolin. You can go straight to hell, Billy, and when you get there, maybe buy a Nintendo or a Sega. You stupid bitch! Our last letter today comes to us from Jack from Wisconsin. Jack writes, "Dear Game Master," yep, that's me, make no mistake, I'm the Game Master. "I'm having a hard time in Contra. I run out of lives really fast. Can you help me?" Contra? Jack, that game is super old. We only play the best and newest games here in 1992. But since you're living in the past, I suppose I could time travel back to the caveman days when it was relevant. Let's go! There you go, Jack. And if you want 30 lives with 2 players, press select before you press start. But you don't have any friends, so you don't need to worry about that. And that's all the time the Game Master has this week. See you next time.